Howdy folks, and welcome back to Hollywood Wargaming. My name's Damon, and in this episode I'm going to be continuing with my Badab War painting tutorials. These are aimed at beginners really, and it's just a speed painting sort of experiment in doing some of the loyalist chapters in the Badab War in 40k. Now if you don't know about the Badab War, you should go and check it out, but in the meantime just have a look at this guy on the left. He is a Carcharadon. One of the chapters that were involved in the Badab War. I believe the Carcharadons, or Space Sharks as they're also known, did send their entire chapter to the Badab War, so do a little bit of research on that. It's pretty cool. Really cool chapter, as you can see, very monochrome in their paint style, in their colour scheme, should I say. Greys, blacks, whites, and we're going to start off with this Xiphon Interceptor here, with a sort of mid-grey, actually on the darker side of things, with Eshin grey. We're going to start with that as our sort of mid-tone over a white base coat here, and we're just going to leave one sort of area out in white, because I've sort of noticed actually the cockpit sort of shape and the nose of the Xiphon Interceptor is quite fish-like. It looks like a fishtail if you hold it the other way around, but we're just going to first smash a couple of layers of thinned down Eshin grey over the top of the white here. It doesn't cover very well Eshin grey actually, so you do need to give it a couple of coats generally, but once that's done, that will be our sort of mid-tone, and then everything else is going to be sort of highlighted up from there. So with the Eshin grey, we're going to highlight that with a lighter grey. With the black over the Eshin grey, you're going to be able to see some of the Eshin grey poking through as highlights for the black, and then as you can see here, I've left the sort of cockpit and nose of the plane almost looks like a whale's tail or a fish tail here, which I think is kind of cool. It's just a sort of detail that I noticed on the plane here, which I thought would be very fishy indeed, so why not. Now we're taking lead belcher and we're just filling in any of the sort of gunmetal areas, so the fronts of the engines here, the backs of the engines of course, and any other areas that we can see that need it. Here we're doing the quad las cannons on the sides of the plane there, picking them out in lead belcher, and that's going to be that for the metal. There's not going to be a huge amount of metal on these guys. The main sort of vibe really is just going for that super monochrome look here. So as opposed to the other sort of videos that I did previously with the Minotaurs and the Exorcists, this one is a little bit more sort of heavy metal style in terms of the sort of edge highlighting and stuff, I suppose. You could totally dry brush it, but we're going to go in a second and do a little bit of edge highlighting, which is quite different to the other two videos that I did. Here though, we're using a bit of black Templar contrast paint just to fill in some of the black areas, especially around the guns there. Any sort of vents that you see, we're going to fill those out with black. The thing about the contrast paint is it's quite wet obviously, so it runs into those recesses really nicely, especially over the Eshin grey, and leaves a little bit of the Eshin grey highlighting through underneath, which creates quite a nice black for you if you ask me. But there's actually quite a bit of black on this, particularly on the underside. I actually ended up going a bit ham on the Black Templar and adding quite a bit of black to it on the details on the top of the plane as well, just to give it a little bit more definition. As you can see, the sort of wing, the wing arch attachments there as well, and just sort of like parts of the fin on the back there as well. Making sure to fill in the back of the sort of engine barrels as well, so that they've got black inside them. The next thing we're going to do is hit all the sort of gunmetal areas with a quick coat of Nuln Oil. You can probably do 2 coats here. I only did 1, but it does depend how dark and how grimy you want it to look. This one I just went with 1 coat of Nuln Oil here into those engines and onto the backs of them as well. And that's it for the Nuln Oil. Making sure we get all the details though, you kind of want to make sure all the recesses are shaded with the Nuln Oil inside the engines there. The next thing we're going to do after that of course is, well, let's have a look actually, spending a bit too long on the Nuln Oil here. Making sure to get those engines at the back as well. We're probably going to go in and make them look a bit more smoky afterwards as well. Right then, I think the next thing we're going to do is pick out a little bit, because it is very monochrome at the moment. We're going to do the windshield now, so we need a little tiny splash of colour here. We're going to hit that with some Aeronautic blue. which is you know, another contrast paint here. Very sort of vibrant, sort of turquoisey sort of colour. Stick that over the windshield there, and don't worry about going over the edges on this one because well, we're going to go around the sort of piping on the cockpit there and catch that with a different colour shortly. But for the meantime, we'll just fill in all of those window panels, making sure to not let it pull too much. You kind of want it to pull around the recesses, of course, a little bit, just to add a little bit of shadow, but you don't want it to pull too much in the actual window itself. So just if you've got too much on your brush, just you know, wipe your brush off a little bit and go back in and take some of that excess moisture off, just to make sure that it's looking a bit more even. As you can see, that's looking pretty cool now. A nice little splash of colour. The blue really works against the sort of cold greys and blacks and whites there as well. Next thing we're going to do though is go in with some Balthazar gold, the same sort of bronze that we used on the Minotaurs, actually, just to sort of tie it in with the rest of the fleet, and just pick out some details with the bronze there as well. Now, I know it's a bit crazy and a little bit different for me next, but I'm actually going to go in with a slightly more heavy metal style next, and actually do a little bit of edge highlighting. Now, I'm not, you know, this is a sort of speed painting job, I suppose, so it's not going to take a huge amount of work to do the edge highlighting, but yeah, you could totally do this with a dry brush, but I just thought, to be honest, it's better off to show a variety of techniques in these sort of videos here. Of course, they're not pro painting tutorials at all, they're just quick color schemes on very small planes. But what we're going to do here is we're going to sort of highlight up the black with the Eschen grey, just to give it a little bit more depth. We're going to then give the Eschen grey a highlight of Administratum grey, and then we're going to give the white a highlight of white scar as well, just on the raised edges. And Sycorax bronze, I believe we use on the Balthazar gold there as well, but making sure that to use a sort of fine tip brush here, I'm just going to get a little bit of the Administratum grey on the edge of my brush and just sort of hit all of those raised areas that I can see around the miniature. There's quite a lot of sort of hard edges on this, which is cool. So it did tend to take a little bit longer than I'd hoped, but still, I'd still class it as a speed paint because we're only doing one highlight. We're not going in with multiple highlights. We're not going to create anything Golden Demon worthy here, but as you can see, that gives it an awful lot more definition. It looks far, far better already, as you can see. Now, I'm not the best at edge highlighting, I must be honest. I'm getting a bit old and my hands are getting a bit shaky, so I find this a bit harder. But as you can see with the white scar here, it's definitely lighter than that sort of under primer that I used with the white. I didn't actually use any white over the top of the primer. This is just naked primer with a white scar highlight, just to make it stand out a little bit. But we are going to do some weathering after this, so don't worry too much if it looks a bit flat and boring at the moment, because that will sort of tie everything together and make everything look a bit more, you know, a bit more grimdark, I suppose. So the next thing that we're going to do here is just hit the all the gold sort of trim, the Balthazar gold, with a little bit of Sycorax bronze, which is quite a bright, vibrant bronze, but it does sort of give it a nice sort of shiny highlight. Just to sort of, you know, when you've got something that's so grey and so black and so dingy looking, just to give something a bit of a pop of colour in terms of its metallics and stuff, really does make it look a bit more visually appealing, I suppose. And that's pretty much that for now. All we're going to do now is just hit those engines with a little bit of Black Templar at the back there, just to make them look a bit sooty and a bit like they've actually been used and worn. Pretty simple to do this. Just make sure that you don't have too much paint on your brush here. We just really sort of draw it away, so that those sort of tips are black. You could probably use a couple of coats here as well, just to make sure that the very sort of ends are actually very black, or just go in with some Chaos Black alternatively. The next thing we're going to do though is get our trusty sponge out with a little bit of lead belcher on here, and just hit the entire miniature with sort of random sponging patterns. We don't want to go over the top on this either, because it will lose a lot of that detail, but where I've been a little bit cack-handed and have done some sort of thicker edge highlighting, I could have gone back in and made the edge highlighting a lot narrower, but I'm actually using the sponge is going to blend it all in a little bit more. The last thing we're going to do here though is an oil wash. Now I'm just using a black oil wash here, not black with brown, so just ivory black here, just to really complement all the colors and the monochrome that we've got here. Tiny amount of oil paint mixed in with some odorless mineral spirits here, or odorless solvents as they're called, artist solvents, and that's just make sure that when you do this that you're mixing it in properly, that you've got no lumps and chunks in there, because you do need to mix it for a little while with your brush, just to make sure that you haven't got those lumps, because if you do put a lump straight onto your vehicle, it's going to clog a lot of the details and it's going to be quite hard to remove. I know from experience on this one. So yeah, just make sure that you mix it fully and try not to spill it all over your kitchen counter like I have in this one. Of course, that's fine with a lot of oil paints, as they don't dry too quickly, so you can remove them with a bit of white spirit if you made a mess. I actually did spill it all over a cream carpet once. I managed to remove it with a lot of white spirit and didn't tell the missus, so she never knew. So that's good. Anyway, dousing the entire thing in the black oil wash. As you can see, there are some little sort of like chunky bits in there, but that's fine as long as it's not big lumps and chunks. But you can move it around with the brush and make it sort of fit where it needs to. Just make sure that you're not putting the sort of gloopiness all over those sort of lighter areas. We are going to go back in with a cotton bud shortly though, and remove all that excess moisture and sort of blend and move the oils around a little bit as well. But just make sure that, of course, the oil wash goes into every crease and crevice of the miniature. As you can see, that really does bring things together. You can see a little bit of the sort of sponging on the nose there, which looks really good as well. Just makes things look so much more sort of together and blended. So yeah, what we're going to do is we're just going to remove some of the moisture here, wick it away with a cotton bud. There's no mineral spirits on here, really. This is just to get rid of the moisture. We're not getting rid of the actual sort of staining effect that the oil has here. And then we're going to leave it to dry, usually for about 24 hours, to be honest. It depends where you are and how humid it is, but generally speaking, the oil washes do sort of dry in about 24 hours, I would say. Sometimes quite a bit less, but I like to leave them overnight just to be sure. And then come back and sort of take some photos of them, I reckon. But I think things are looking pretty good with the Carcharadons here. I know this is a popular chapter, so it's good to sort of do my version of it, I suppose, because I've never painted these guys before, so it's nice to do this for the first time, I must say. But anyway, what am I going to do with the next one, I wonder? Guesses on a postcard, please. But let's have a look at the photos now. As you can see, you know, overall looks pretty good for a speed painting job, I'd say. Didn't take long at all. Please do like, share, subscribe, and I will catch you in the next video. Peace out.